All right, and I think we're on. So, g'day, my name's Glenn. I am the founder of the Happy Cow Milk Company, and every week we try and talk to interesting people to do around animal welfare or anything to do with dairy. And our goal at Happy Cow Milk Company is to make dairy a little bit more caring, kinder, and fairer. So this week we've got Dr. Alexandra Green. She is a researcher from the University of Sydney. And I met her a couple of years ago, and she's doing some really interesting, sorry, my team are telling me we're not live, but looks like we're live. Some very interesting research around cow vocalization. So I will add Alexandra in now. How are you doing, Alexandra?
Hello, thank you for having me on today, Glenn.
That's great. We met, 3 years ago, I think, at a conference, and you gave us a preliminary rundown on your research, and now when I look back, you've got a couple of papers published.
Yeah, so I think we met at it was a Dairy Research Foundation symposium approximately 3 years ago, and that's when I was just in the fieldwork stages of this research. So it's great that I've now been able to publish this research and finish off my PhD, looking at the vocalizations of cows and the emotional information that is encoded within their vocalizations and how we can use this to better their welfare on farm.
Well, that sounds right up our alley, but before I introduce you, we have a latecomer to the broadcast. We have our farmer, Chris Falconer from the Waikato. How are you, Chris? Can you hear us, Chris? I don't think you can. Oh, well, this is why we do a trial run. Okay, I'm going to mute Chris. So we can't hear you, Chris. Try again. Yep.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, there we go. All right. All right. Can you hear us okay, Chris?
I can now.
All right. Thanks. Right. So you just chime in whenever you need to, Chris. So Alexandra, explain to us what your research is and why do we need to research cow vocalization?
Yes, so as you said, my research is on looking at the vocalizations of Holstein Friesian dairy cows. I looked at their vocalizations in a range of different dairy farming contexts where they were likely to vocalize. And the reason we looked at their vocalizations is to try and work out whether we can use them to assess their welfare on farm. And the reason we've done this is because in a range of different mammalian species, and including humans, they've started to show that emotions can be encoded within the voice. So we thought that this is a great non-invasive measure of welfare in the cows. So why don't we capitalize on this to improve their welfare on farm?
So, well, tell us, what did you find?
Yes, so I conducted a few studies. So I used both free-ranging dairy cows as well as commercial dairy cows in a indoor barn system. What we firstly showed was, the piloting stage involved me just working out where were they going to vocalize. So I recorded them pretty much from dusk till dawn, and I recorded them in many different contexts, trying to work out when are they going to vocalize for me. And then from there, I was able to study them a little bit further. So with the free-ranging dairy cows, what I looked at was their responses during estrus. So whether they would vocalize then and when would these vocalizations be most apparent. I then also recorded them during isolation from their herd mates, given the fact that they are very social and a herd living species. We had two different treatments for them there. So firstly, where they could see their herd mates, and then when they couldn't see their herd mates, and what were the differences between that. We also recorded them when they were about to receive a really tasty food reward of hay. And then we frustrated them and took the food away and let their friends eat the food while they watched on. So we recorded them then as well. In the commercial context, I recorded them during the peripartum period. So when they were...
What's that?
So peripartum is when the pregnant cows, when they were in labor, the second stage of labor, so their water had just broken,
Nice.
and they were giving birth. So all of the cows I recorded, the farmer helped pull the calf out. I then recorded them with the calf, so they had time to bond with the calf, lick and sniff and interact with the calf, and then upon subsequent calf separation as well. And it was a fence line separation procedure. So these were all of the contexts that I had, and then from there I was able to study different factors of their voice. So I firstly wanted to so when I did my initial observations in the free-ranging cattle, what I noticed is that they were very recognizable by their voices. Like I could tell them apart without even seeing them, which cow was which. So I thought, why don't we look at the individuality of their voice? So my first paper involved looking at the individual distinctiveness of their voice and the ability of this to be maintained across a variety of contexts. So what this showed is that there is an ability, just like in humans, for the cows to be recognizable despite what they're saying, essentially. So what that means is a cow that was vocalizing during isolation from her herd mates could then be recognized by the same voice when she was vocalizing in anticipation of feed. So that was the first.
Does that mean that a cow, you have husky voice cows or high-pitched cows or...
Exactly that. So there are a range of different features which contribute to the individuality of their voice. Some things like the roughness or the huskiness of their voice. So some cows more than others had that. Others had extremely high-pitched voices. There were all these other what's called non-linear features of their voices, which also contributed to this distinctiveness.
Chris, can you tell your cows by their moo?
I don't know if I can do that, but what I do know is that some cows vocalize more than others, and some have a habit of doing it. And
when?
Well, so even when they're freshly calved or postpartum or peripartum, some cows won't make a sound and others will. And that kind of flows through their whole personality and their whole cycle. So those will be the same cows that will grizzle at you on the other side of the fence when they want to be shifted. And they're the same cows that will bellow at a dog. They're the same cow. So it's almost like you've got introvert and extrovert cows in terms of the way they vocalize. Cows are definitely different. But I think for us, without having taken the time to study the individuals, the way they vocalize, the thing we most recognize is that there are quiet cows, noisy cows, and cows in the whole spectrum of the way they vocalize.
Sorry, I interrupted you there, Alexandra.
No, that's all right. That's exactly what I was going to say as well. So during my initial observations, I guess one of the problems I encountered was that there is such a high variability in whether they do vocalize or not, which probably relates back to their individual characteristics and personalities. So there were some chatty cows that vocalized thousands of vocalizations in the day I would record from this one cow, and then there would be other cows where across the months of recording them I didn't even hear a single vocalization. So it really reflects their individual characteristics, and I guess just like humans, they are very individualized. But yes, that was, I guess, one of the challenges I encountered, is that not all of them vocalized, and then the ones that did would be thousands and thousands. And yeah, I did notice across the different contexts, there would be the ones that were extremely chatty and then the ones not so much.
So I suppose the way I always think of it, if cows are making a noise, it kind of means something's wrong. So is a happy cow a quiet cow?
Well, based off my observations, what I think is that, yeah, a happy cow is probably a quiet cow. So cows, compared to other species that have been studied, they seldom vocalize. So I think during my time recording them, there were some days where I didn't even capture a single vocalization, and it wasn't until they were exposed to these more stressful contexts where I was able to record vocalizations. And what we know, looking at other mammalian species, including humans, is that when you become more stressed or exposed to a stressor in your environment, what happens is that physiological changes occur. So, for example, if I'm scared or stressed, my heart rate will increase. My muscles used for vocal production, they will start to tighten. Maybe my saliva will reduce as well. And then this then leads on to audible changes in the voice. And one of these changes, for instance, is the rate at which you speak. So when we are recording more vocalizations, it's suggesting more stressful or arousing situation that the cows are in. And this was definitely what I noticed in the subsequent chapters of my thesis. So I found that the peripartum cows were the most vocal, especially during cow-calf separation, compared to, for instance, the free-ranging cows, where they had adequate resources, minimal stress, things like that. So most definitely, a happy cow is probably a quiet cow, and the reason is because they rarely vocalize. When they do vocalize, we do know it is meaningful for them.
Okay. And what do you reckon that is, Chris? What's a meaningful event for a cow to vocalize?
Well, I think there's two ends of the spectrum, and one is the stressed cow. So yes, we're very used to hearing that, but we're not really used to hearing the happy cow. And what I can tell you is that when cows are allowed the freedom and the space and given the energy to express themselves, they get vocal again. So what I've noticed from going from milking cows twice a day and having them in a routine where they're at the shed twice, where they're I guess put into a routine of having these two pressure times of the day. If you remove some of that pressure, what I've observed is that cows actually have the energy to play. And when cows play, they start vocalizing again. And it's quite it's a particular sound that looks like it can look like a high-end stress sound, but you know they're not. They put their heads down and they make like a very short sort of almost like a coughing, barking move.
Like a barking,
and they do that when they're playing. They do that when they're playing as well. So it's almost like at both ends of the spectrum, when they're really stressed, they put their head down and, sorry, I'm not very good at imitations, but they sort of make a brrr sound.
Yeah, that's good.
But they also do that when they're happy and when they're playing as well. They will also start skipping around on their feet, put their head down and make the same kind of sound. So it's like at both ends of the spectrum, they get vocal.
Yeah, most definitely. So there's actually some science behind that. So the reason they're highly vocal at both this positive stress and the negative stress is because there are features within the voice which relate to stress alone. And then there are other features of the voice which can differentiate whether a situation is either positive or negative. So where I've talked about the increased vocalization rate, this relates to stress alone, but it doesn't tell us whether it's a positive stress or a negative stress. And this is why you would be seeing it when they are very happy and playful, and then when they are stressed as well, for example, when they're taken from the calf. So there are other features we can then look at to differentiate between those two. So for example, one thing, as you said, when they play, they start to make this bark sound. So a thing we can look at is the type of the call that they're producing, and this will also reflect their emotional state. So what I noticed is when the cow and calf were interacting together, so right after birth, the mother would make these nasalized, so closed mouth calls, so through her nose, and they're very soft sounding. They're really quite hard to pick up, but these are sort of indicative of the positive state that she's in. So she's being able to express this maternal care towards the calf. It's affiliative, yeah, exactly like the photo here. So during this time, she'll repeatedly make these closed mouth, low pitch vocalizations. And then in other contexts where the stress may become more negative, this is when she'll start to open up her mouth and produce these loud open mouth vocalizations. So it's sort of like a transition between one type of vocalization to the other, depending on the context and emotions that she is feeling.
So in your research, you've basically recorded these their vocalizations, and you've I suppose made a digital, you've measured the frequency and so on. Can you tell the difference between those similar sounds, but when it's plain and when it's, I suppose, stressed?
Yes, so there's a range of different acoustic features which we can look at to make inferences about whether they're feeling sad or happy, stressed, calm, things like that. And as I said before, this relates back to the fact that just like cows, they're mammals, just like humans, cows are mammals. And there are a range of different things that go on in our anatomy and our physiology, which then go on to influence our voice. So just like a human, so say I was really nervous, I might start to talk a lot faster. I might start to talk in a really high-pitched voice. If I'm angry, I'll start to talk with a really scratchy, rough voice. I might start to talk a lot louder. So these same changes go on in the cows, and it's related back to how the muscles work for vocal production and saliva and things like that. So what I found in the cows is that they had contextually distinct voices, which most likely relates back to the emotions they're feeling. So for instance, there are a range of different features that we've found. So generally the cows that were giving birth, they produced really long duration vocalizations, and they were very rough sounding, and they were extremely loud as well. In contrast to this, when the cows were separated from their calf, they produced quite high-pitched vocalizations, and then as the stress progressed, the calls started to become a lot rougher and harsher sounding as well. And then they would tend to, instead of just produce a single moo, they would produce a sequence of moos in order to...
Can you do an imitation, Chris?
Well, you mean the separated calf moo, or the I'm hungry, or the I'm hungry moo?
Oh, well, it's almost the same, isn't it?
Not quite, no. Like I think Alexandra's hit on it right there. It's quite persistent. You can pick up that persistent call from a cow that's separated versus a cow that's bellowing at you over a fence. It is quite a high pitched. You can hear it, but it's more of like a single plaintive "come and feed me" moo, as opposed to a "where the hell is my baby" moo. They're different. You can tell them apart for sure.
Can you reliably determine what a cow's emotion is by her vocalization?
So the thing about cows, and what I said before, is because they rarely vocalize, if this were to be applied on farm, you'd probably want to complement it with other measures, because they don't vocalize that much, and it can vary according to the cow. So if you were to use this as a welfare measure, then I'd recommend looking at other behaviors as well, or maybe things such as heart rate or other physiological measures. However, the information within the vocalization can definitely give us insight into their emotional state, as seen in other species of animals and humans as well. So definitely can be done, but just whether this can be applied on farm remains unknown. There is a lot of work being done now using like machine learning techniques to sort of automate the process of collecting this data, which would make it a lot easier than having to manually go out and collect vocalizations and then analyze them at a later date. But for now, I think this measure should be used in conjunction with other validated measures.
So maybe in the future we could have a microphone on one of Chris's cows, and then you could look at your app and it could tell you how happy his cows are. If they're bellowing, you would tell everyone that they're hungry.
Yes,
we're still a wee way away from that.
I think technology is increasing at a really advanced rate, so who knows how long it will be, maybe not too far in the future.
And what do you think about this question? Are there different languages?
So I always get asked this question, and I don't know the answer. I know that in, like, for example, bird species, they have different dialects depending on their location. So it is potential. It is possible that they have different languages according to, well, not really languages. They will have differences according to their breed or their size. We know that, for example, larger animals will have different vocal features to younger ones. And then, yeah, individuals have different voices. So, yeah, most definitely they probably do. It's just in my research, I focus mainly on the Holstein Friesians. But yeah, it would be great to compare Jerseys or Herefords and things like that to see what the differences are. But they produce the same types of sounds, but they do have differences in their voice.
All right, thanks, Anne. That's a good question. And we've got another question from Emma. These are different cattle breeds. I think they have a universal language. Oh, well, yes.
Yeah. So most definitely. So they produce the same call types. So those closed mouth calls, those mixed calls with closed and open mouth parts, and then the open mouth calls, but they'll sound different according to their individual characteristics and their size and their breed and things like that.
So you mentioned bird calls. Are you involved in any research in other animals, or is there anything interesting around the way they communicate that's similar or different to cows?
Yes, so a bit of a side project that I was working on was looking at communication in kangaroos, and we were looking at the human-animal interactions and the ability of kangaroos to communicate towards humans when they were faced with an unsolvable problem. So I was with a colleague, Dr. Alan McElligott, who was the lead of the study, and he was on sabbatical from the UK out in Australia, and his background is in cognition and zoology, and he was really interested in this idea of so there was a previous idea that only domesticated species, so ones that have evolved alongside humans, that they would have this interspecies communication, so this ability to communicate with humans. But he'd done a lot of observing of wildlife, and he thought maybe that's not the case. Maybe it isn't a domesticated trait, but maybe it's just a learned behavior, so something that animals can learn over time given the right circumstances. So we looked at captive kangaroos. There were eastern grey kangaroos, Kangaroo Island kangaroos, which are super friendly, and then there was also a red kangaroo. These kangaroos were all either reared in captivity as they were orphaned, or they were bred in captivity. And what we did is we trained them up with a tasty food reward in a box which they could not open. So they had previously learned that the food was in the box and they could access it. But when we tested them, we put a lid on the box and we wanted to see what their responses were. And they actually started to look towards the human present and look back and forth between the box and the human. And in some cases, they even approached the human and started scratching at him and then looking back towards the box, really indicating their need and motivation to open this box. And I think this behavior is sort of similar to what is called pawing in dogs, you know, when they start to scratch you and look at you when they want some food. So what this has shown is that wild animals are also capable of communicating towards humans. So it might not necessarily be a trait of domesticated animals.
Would this be similar to the bushfires, and you see the photos of koalas going up to firefighters for a drink?
Not sure about that one, because those ones, they have not, probably they're wild animals and they haven't been in contact with humans before. But I think in those circumstances where the situation was quite bad and they're needing water and everything, that's why they've sort of gone towards the human for assistance, no matter if they were a threat or anything. But yeah, I'm not too sure about wild animals, but what we think this behavior, what happens is in the wild, the kangaroos would be communicating to each other in this way. And it's just that in the captive setting, they were able to adapt this behavior towards the humans. So given that they are a social species, they would be communicating towards one another. But when the conditions are right, so in the captive setting, they then express this towards the humans as well.
Or Chris might know, well, I'll ask both of you, do cows moo or vocalize because they just what they do, or do they expect a response?
Well, the answer is, well, you know, we talked about that closed mouth. I'm not sure that a cow expects a response from its calf, but maybe that's just part of the bonding procedure, is that the calf hears the vocalization, and that's part of the bonding. It's not so much a response thing as a, hey, here I am, here's my voice.
But when she sees the cow, the paddock next door getting shifted, and she's not getting shifted, and she moves.
She doesn't like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that her saying, "Hang on, you need to move me too"?
Yes, it is. But if she's by herself in a paddock, it might also be, hey, where's my herd going? More than just the feed. So she might be saying, hey, where are my friends going? Because cows don't like to be by themselves. So that they'll make noises when the herd is effectively leaving them. Usually more persistently than when they're hungry, because they'll only do that when you're there, right? So we talked about the communication, and they've learned to communicate. That saying that if nobody's to hear a tree fall, that it actually fall in the forest. If you don't go and see your cows, they won't bellow. The second they see you and they're hungry, they'll bellow. So it is a clear response and association between you and the cow knowing that, hey, you're the guy that opens the gate and lets me go and get some more food, or moves me on, or does whatever you need to do. So they definitely communicate in that way. There's no question.
Yeah, most definitely. I think that with the vocalizations, there is a communicative function for them. They're not going to just vocalize for no reason. So as you said before, when the cow and calf are bonding, so I think some studies have actually shown that what they think is these low nasalized vocalizations are so that the calf can learn its mother's voice, because in the wild, when they are calving, they're called a hider species. So the calf will generally hide in bushes, and the cows will roam around and then come back to the calf later on. So the idea is that if the calf can learn the mother's voice and they're off hiding, then if the mother vocalizes, then the calf can know where the mother is. So that's the reason behind those vocalizations. But yes, definitely, I think they're not going to vocalize for no reason, and this is because they are a prey species. So if you think about a prey species, you don't want to make yourself known to a predator, especially if we're alone. So you're only going to vocalize when you really, really need to. So in the case of the cow being alone, she's probably vocalizing to say, hey, where is my herd? Or I would like to re-establish contact with them, because being alone can be dangerous, and also because they are highly social.
Is that you, Chris?
No.
I don't know where that's coming from.
Not sure where that's from.
Okay, so what's next for you? What where are you going next? Are you continuing with this line of research?
So I'm no longer looking at the vocalizations. My role now is mainly doing biostatistics. So I look at various animal-related data sets and make data-driven conclusions from the data. It's not as fun or not as fancy and sexy as the cow vocalization stuff, but it definitely, we can use different data sets, including farm-based data, to improve the welfare of animals and study different welfare traits of the animals as well. So
I think probably, I mean, it's a shame you can't play us your recordings, because I don't know how to make technology do that onto a live stream, but
yeah.
I'm sure if you played them, Chris would sort of say he would know exactly what they mean. So
we could have sort of a game show.
Yeah, so
Just
we
the cow
could say,
vocalization.
yeah. So what is the point of maybe researching this from an academic perspective when there's probably 11,500 Chris's in New Zealand who know what it means?
Exactly right. So I get, especially at farming conferences and things like that, you get a lot of farmers telling you, well, we already know this information, so why is it useful? Why are you doing this research? So this research, yeah, it is quite fundamental. And the reason we need to do this fundamental research is that farmers anecdotally already know this, but it's really important in science to test things under an accepted scientific setup, so that we can then compare things accurately to it and then sort of make changes based on that. So while people have said, yes, I can identify individual cows, or yes, I know when a cow is stressed, what exactly is it about their voice that reflects this level of stress? Or what is it about their voice that makes you able to distinguish between your herd members? So it's really important to look at this in a scientific setup in order to validate what the farmers have been saying. It contributes to our understanding of vocal communication, not only in cattle, but as in mammalian species as a whole. How does this relate to humans? It shows the similarities between us. And the findings of this research, it may also encourage farmers to maybe tailor their practices based on the vocal feedback of their animals. So if we could extend this research, for example, and maybe compare the responses of the vocalizations of the cows when they're exposed to different types of separation, and then look at the specific features of their voice which we know are related to stress, then which one, based on what they're telling us, would be the most welfare friendly and the most ideal for the cows.
Interesting.
And I guess also this research is instrumental for further vocal research. So ideally, we'll be able to develop technologies around this and different applications. Ones that I think would be most beneficial based on my findings is that we could more closely look at the timing of joining or AI based on when they're vocalizing. They started to vocalize a lot sooner than they started to show any signs of estrus. So before they started mounting or getting quite frisky, they started to vocalize like crazy. And then it was a few hours later, which is when they started to show other visual signs. So maybe this would give us a bit of more of a cue to when to join the animals. During calving, so they mainly vocalized, it was mainly the heifers, and it was when they were getting pulled. They didn't vocalize at all when they just naturally calved. So maybe this will give us a sign for when farming intervention is needed. So it was the heifers and the ones that really struggled with the calving that vocalized and had this really rough, scratchy voice and a really long duration of vocalizing. So potentially we can use this to assess when a vet is needed or a farmer is needed. And then, yeah, we could determine maybe best practice weaning methods based on their voice as well.
Okay. Well, Anne, thanks for another comment. In the northern hemisphere, they tend to keep animals housed inside, especially during winter. Have you been able to talk to anyone looking at the same subject on how cows vocalize in that environment, or perhaps to gauge where they are happier when we think the weather is inclement or grubby?
So I haven't looked at any the vocalizations of any northern hemisphere cows during winter, but at the second farm that I looked at, it was a commercial farm, so they were housed indoors in freestall barns, and it was in this setting which is where we got more vocalizations, probably for two reasons. The first reason is that there were a lot more cows, so a lot more animals that they can talk to. And the second reason is probably because I recorded them in these more stressful situations. So I suspect that in Northern Hemisphere barns as well, you would get vocalizations in similar contexts. And given that they are so close together and there are many animals in the same barn, you're probably going to get more vocalizations because they want to talk to each other.
What do you think about that, Chris? That question from Anne.
Well, I farmed. I spent 9 years in the UK, so I got to observe a number of cows up in there, and I think it's hard to know because the behaviours that they exhibit and the conditions that they're kept in may well influence it. But to be honest, the times when cows vocalize is when you're there and when you're intervening and when you're doing those things with them. So when Alexandra said, cows moo when they're pulling the calf out, yeah, they do. But if you have a mob of springers next to you and there could be 10 or 12 calvings, you won't hear it.
What's a springer?
So a cow within 3 or 4 weeks of calving. So we'll put them into mobs so that we can observe them a bit more closely, maybe change their diet to transition them to the milking diet. And you will very rarely hear a peep out of a cow if you're not intervening with her during calving. So what that tells me is intervention during calving is very stressful for a cow. But that's what that tells me. So listening to Alexandra, what that tells me is that the aim should be for non-intervention calvings, because obviously it's a very stressful part of an animal's life if that's why they're vocalizing.
But isn't that, don't most people not intervene on a calving anyway? Won't you intervene only when you have to?
Well, I don't know. There's expediency. If you're doing, some people will check their animals 3 or 4 times a day. And if they want a calf out with just the front legs out or whatever, they'll get in there and they'll whip it out just so they don't have to come back later to check. So, that's a thing that happens. Me personally, I'd really like to leave them alone and make a judgment call on whether or not it's a problematic calving, if there's an abnormal presentation, which you can see for all sorts of reasons without going into farming techie stuff. But yeah, my observation is that cows don't vocalize when they're calving by themselves.
Yeah, and Bruce makes a very good point. But sometimes they need intervention, and the calves.
Yes.
Yep, exactly, Bruce.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. But at that point, when they need intervention, they're under stress anyway. So it's likely that they'll be vocalizing then anyway. So that's, yeah.
Now, Bruce is he's got a big barn down in the South Island. He's a little bit sensitive about his barn. So he says, our cows vocalize very little when houses during winter. They certainly weren't stressed. No, I'd believe that, Bruce.
No, that's fine. No, I agree, 100%.
Most
Like I've
definitely.
in the northern hemisphere for 9 years, and typically, like I say, if we're not there, if there's nothing going on, if they're not hungry, if they're not stressed in any kind of way, no, they don't. They're quiet as a lamb.
So,
And I use
Chris,
that term,
yeah, quite
I
as a
agree.
man.
Quiet
So,
as a cow.
yeah. So, okay, Chris. Well, what's the key to a happy cow?
Preventing the stress, or mitigating the stress. One of the things that I'm very cognizant of is that we find ourselves having to mitigate pressure points for cows because of what we're asking of them, and so when they're stressed,
What do you
there's
mean?
something wrong.
What do you mean by
when
that?
we're asking things, so cows that are under metabolic pressure or energy pressure, so post-calving, for instance, when cows have an energy deficit, when cows aren't feeling well for whatever reason, they're obviously stressed. And the goal with every farmer is to keep their stock as happy as they can do, for as long and as often as they can do, and that's from system 5 to system 1. That's the goal. I think the question you have to ask yourself is why are we having to intervene, and why are we having to mitigate? What have we done? What have we taken from them, or what are we doing to them, or what are we asking of them that makes the mitigation necessary? So a mitigation is almost intervening before the stress occurs, but every time you do that, there's a fine line. There's a point at which you get that a little bit wrong, and cows tip over into that stress phase. So how do we interact and manage our stock so that we don't put them in that position where they could tip into that situation? And like any industry, there are good operators and average operators. And,
well, that's, yeah.
But the more things you throw at a cow, the more you ask of her, the more of those mitigations you have to make. The more of those potential interventions there are, the more balls you have to juggle. And the more balls you've got in the air, the more likely it is you're going to drop one.
So what you could be saying is, if you're you're talking about complicated systems and simple systems, I suppose. In a complicated system, a cow might produce twice as much milk, but you've got to get maybe 3 times as more things right in order for her to keep doing that and be happy.
I think that's fair, but I also think it's fair to say that some people can do that.
Yeah.
It's just harder. It's harder, no question.
Okay. Run out of questions, Alexandra. If anyone else has got any questions, put them in the comments. If there's something that I haven't asked, or Chris, have you got anything you'd like to ask?
Do cows vocalize to other animals the way they vocalize to and with us?
Never been asked that question before, and I actually don't know the answer. Maybe so for instance, if you had a dog on farm used to herd the cows, I've seen, I think, and the dog goes for the cow, I've seen them sort of bark at the dog in response to that. Whereas in other situations, yeah, I'm not sure. I guess that would be one of those things where you'd have to go out and observe it and see if it happens. But yeah, that's the only situation that I recall. And it was just like a short, sharp vocalization, most likely just maybe not even in response to, not to vocalize towards the dog, but just in response to the stress that the dog caused.
And Anne asks, have you noticed if they get angry with each other or with the human or dog?
The cows get angry at each other. So yeah, for instance, during when we frustrated them with the feed, so when they didn't have access to the food and they watched their herd mates eat the food, they did start to vocalize with a really angry, so a loud voice and really rough, scratchy voice, and they were vocalizing to the other cows. So,
I've seen pecking order squabbles between cows. Irrespective of any other stressor, it is literally just a little pecking order thing.
Yeah.
Where an alpha cow will exert themselves over another cow, and they will vocalize when they're doing it. They absolutely will.
Asserting her dominance. Yeah.
Yep, for sure.
There must be research in all of that as well, Alexandra. Pecking orders in cows.
There is research on dominance and leader and follower cows. I don't know too much about it, but there has been some research that has been done on that, most definitely.
But cows have their routines as well. You'll get, like, the first cow into the cow shed, is it normally the same cow, Chris?
Well, not every time, but there's a definite pattern. Cows will prefer one side of the shed. If you're in a herringbone where they come in on different sides, they will definitely prefer one side or the other. And one of the things you can pick up, if a cow's not feeling right or there's something going wrong, she'll turn up in a funny place in the cow shed when you're milking. You go, what are you doing here? And a great example of that is that I've got a cow who is not a vocal cow, by the way, never makes a sound except for when she's freshly calved, and then she makes that low sound. I was setting up the cow shed one morning as she came in first up the left-hand side row. She never comes in that row, never comes in first, and she just stood in the middle of the row, and she came up to the front and she had mastitis. She'd never had mastitis in her life, and yet there she was presenting herself in a place where she never ever does that, and she had her first ever case of mastitis. So I know, you tell me if that's a form of communication or at least understanding that she needs to tell someone or she needs to communicate that with someone, but it's the one and only time she's ever done it. She's never done it since. So I don't know. Very anecdotal, but
yeah. What's interesting around, well, I just think of, when you can tell a cow when she's on heat when she's ovulating, you can tell, the sheds that measure cows walking through a pedometer and they measure weight and those sorts of things. You add 3 of those parameters together and you can tell if she's on heat. For instance, if she's walked further, she's eaten less. And what's the other one? Produce less milk. She's
they hold the milk. Yeah.
Almost 100% ovulating or on heat. So I suppose you could do a similar thing with vocalizations. If, like you said, she starts vocalizing before she comes on heat. It's just another parameter you can add in.
Most definitely. So I think it would be great if you could sort of somehow put it on the collar devices, a microphone, and sort of there's been some studies looking at the vocal rate over the 24 hours and how it sort of spikes. But if we could further that and not only look at the rate of vocalizations, but the different features of the voice. So maybe at a particular point of time when she's in heat, her voice gets really rough and scratchy or a lot louder. So if we could look at these things, it might help us pinpoint a little bit better when she's becoming boisterous.
Yeah, sorry, Alexandra, have you done any work with the fenceless systems, the collars and the sound?
I haven't, but I actually have a friend and a PhD colleague who is doing her PhD on that research. So you might have to get her on to your program next time.
Yeah, I think I met her as well when I met you that time. Yeah.
Patricia Caruso, yes.
All right, we'll get her details. We want to talk to her because we've got a company, Halter, in New Zealand, that are doing that, and very interested to figure out how that goes. Well,
yeah, I can't tell you too much about it. I don't know, but she'd be the one to speak with.
Cool. Well, I'm sort of thinking I've run out of things to say, but I think that's it's been very interesting. I hope our crowd are interested in that, and if you've got any final questions, quickly put them in there. And if you've got anything else you'd like to add, Alexandra or Chris?
I think I pretty much summarized my whole 50,000 word PhD in that amount of time. So I think, yeah, all good for me.
I would love, Alexandra, for you to put together a sequence of sounds.
Yes.
And actually do that quiz. I would love that. Would be a great thing to do. Not so much, obviously, not so scientific, but just for a bit of fun, just to see how tuned in we really are. That'd be great. I love that.
I did want to actually do a study like that. So there's a field of science called psychoacoustics, and it involves looking at either the animal's response to vocalizations or the human's response. So I did want to look at whether different farmers can perceive the differences in the voice, but I unfortunately just ran out of time. But yeah, I would love to put something together.
Yeah, g'day, Bart. Yeah, there'll be a replay. Don't worry. Actually, that's a really good idea. Can we get the vocalizations off you, Alexandra? Can we just put we'll put a survey up and we'll see who gets them all right.
I could send you a few, and then hopefully you'd be able to differentiate between the different cows and things like that, or maybe determine which cows are the same cow. Yeah.
Actually, yeah. That's okay. That'll be fantastic. That's a good idea, Chris. Thanks for that.
That's cool. I did a blind whiskey tasting with my brother the other day, and I got it right. So I'm feeling quite cocky.
Oh no, that's awesome. I will follow Alexandra on Twitter, and if you ever want to get in touch with her, you can contact us. You can email me. I have got my email here. Google Alexandra Green, and you come across all her papers. If you have trouble getting them, I'm sure we can forward them to anyone. Couldn't we, Alexandra?
Yeah, most definitely. Or you can email me as well. I forgot to give my email, but or you can just send me a message on Twitter and I'll get back to you.
Yeah, or email me and I'll get it done. So
what's your Twitter handle, Alexandra?
Oh, that's right here.
It was on the other page.
Right there. Can you see that?
There it is. Okay, cool.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alexandra. I appreciate you doing this. Oh, hang on, we've got one more comment. Hang on. It's rare praise for Happy Cow Milk from Bruce in the Deep South. Thanks, Bruce. Actually, Bruce, we need to get you on as well. So thank you, Alexandra, and thanks, Chris, for joining in. And everybody, if you've got any questions, please email me, Glenn at Happy Cow Milk. And next week, we haven't finalized our guest next week, but it'll be interesting anyway. So thank you very much, and good night.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.